Let me outline the stakes really quickly. I'm in my early 30s, I'm 10 years out from graduating from my elite university, and I feel like I've been flopping at pretty much every aspect of my life in the past decade. What do I mean by flopping? I think by flopping, I mean failing to meet the expectations that I set out to meet when I was younger, to the extent that I relate to these following memes. Tweet from your friend Dracula. I wonder what I could do if I didn't structure my entire life around avoiding getting yelled at. Tumblr post from Nebra Skydisk. I know it's not really a popular statement and it sounds dismissive, but you'll be miserable for as long as you deny your own agency in your own happiness. That is to say that I really am not happy with my current situation and my life outlook. And this extends to various aspects of my life holistically. I feel this way the most in terms of employment. It might just be my reality as a millennial, but I feel like I've been generally underemployed the entire time that I've been in the workforce. And even outside of the jobs that I have had, I've generally avoided being in a managerial position. I haven't really been able to move up any sort of ladder, whether it's in my field or any field that I've worked in. So again, I graduated college 10 years ago in 2015. I've worked various jobs within my field of sociology and also a lot of other jobs just to pay the bills and keep money coming in. And again, these jobs were generally fulfilling in some way, or I did feel like I was actualizing myself in taking them. And yet, I don't think I've been able to come into any job situation from a place of strength. It usually feels like a place of scarcity. The job or position that I felt the most actualized in was as a freelance writer. I used to be a full-time freelance writer in the arts and culture journalism sector. That all came tumbling down during the COVID lockdown. At that point, all of my work dried up and I had to pivot into a lot of other types of ways of making money, such as building furniture, doing Postmates, and working in the service industry. And these jobs were also fine, but they were not jobs that were going to get me into a place of any sort of stability. And as it pertains to now, when I'm also again on the job hunt, I still feel like I'm coming at it from the same place of scarcity. I feel like no matter what I do, I really am not going to be able to get into some sort of life-changing job situation or any job that's going to move me into any other higher income echelon. And that's not all there is to life, but it's still something that I probably would benefit from in the long term. Most of my job and career decisions were made from a lot of short-term thinking. And as I even apply to jobs now, I almost feel like I can't even shoot very high in the jobs that I apply for. I feel like I'm going to be perpetually stuck in these dead-end jobs. One other aspect of my life that I feel like I'm flopping at that goes kind of in tandem with employment is creative labor. Because my former job as a freelance writer was a really good actualization of my creative energy, in comparison now, I'm not really doing anything of that sort, and I definitely feel some dissonance with that. That is to say, I'm still writing and I'm making videos and I'm doing various types of things to get my message out there, but it's not necessarily adding up to what I wanted to add up to. There's this specter that's been haunting me for the better part of the past decade, and that is building an audience. And when I say audience, I don't necessarily mean followers on YouTube or Instagram or anything like that, but just a general audience of people that can receive the message of the work that I'm putting out there. This also is wrapped up in a little bit of an insecurity. So a little bit of Hassan lore is that I actually wrote a novel when I was about 21, 22 years old. I finished it in 2016. The novel never got published, and the contents of it, well, I'm gonna save that topic for a future Q&A video maybe. Suffice to say, it followed the story of a young protagonist as he wrestled with questions of grief, trauma, and being in diaspora. So as one does after they finish a novel or manuscript, I did query my novel to a few agents, some of whom took a long time to get back to me, some of them flaked, but all of them kind of gave me the same message and the same guidance. That guidance was that I didn't have a following. I was an unknown author, so no matter what, it was going to be pretty hard for them to sell my book to a publishing house. They pretty much all advised me to go out there and build an audience and then come back to them after I had done that. Which at the time of 2016, I don't even think I had an Instagram page or any sort of social media presence. This was an impossible task for me to think about. Now, naturally, I did start to build an audience by virtue of the things that I was doing at that time, like poetry and performances, but I still never really reached a level of an audience that would be marketable to an agent or someone that was looking to publish a book. And at this point in 2025, I still don't really have a transformative number of audience members that are out there that are really looking for something that I would publish, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, or anything creative. I think there have been times when I've built momentum in the direction of that following, but it didn't necessarily come to fruition in the end. Ultimately, because I haven't built that large audience, I feel like no matter what I do, I'm gonna feel stifled because I won't be able to get that product that I have, even if it's a finished product, out there and distribute it. One aspect of my life that I feel like I've flopped at is relationships. I don't think I've ever been intentional about dating people. I've never really thought about what my criteria were going to be when I set out to date somebody because I never really set out to date anybody. I usually got into relationships based on vibes or situationships that just kept extending themselves. For pretty much all of my long-term adult relationships, I've gone off an initial spark and then nested pretty quickly. And this is even pretty okay considering that these were the times when the feelings were reciprocated. There have also been times in my adult life when I've suffered from limerence. Limerence, for people that are unaware of the term or not familiar with it, is basically a really sort of intense attachment that is generally one-sided. Think of it as a crush that is just way overboard. In times when I've felt limerence towards people, it really wasn't based off of any signal that they were actually giving me. It was just an intense feeling that I kind of projected onto them, but I still got really hung up on in my internal drive. And even in the relationships that I did sort of curate and foster to the extent that I did do that, there was still a level to which I allowed myself to be disrespected and my boundaries to be crossed. An extent to which I compromised a lot and didn't think that I was in a position to articulate and express my needs in the relationship. An extent to which I mostly kept relationships going out of a tendency for continuity. And the thing is, these weren't necessarily toxic or bad relationships, but they were just still carried out and drawn out when they didn't necessarily need to be. Another distinct but related aspect is friendships. There is also an extent to which I let friendships go on and continue to exist when I wasn't really being served in the friendship. And I say that to mean that there were some friendships that I experienced, especially in my early 20s when I was out of college, in which I was not really a friend to the person. I was more like their helper. I mean, we would hang out and do things together, but oftentimes I was the one that they called when they needed to move house or when they needed to fix a curtain rod or unclog a drain or things like that. Things which I was generally happy to do and have a use for, but still it wasn't necessarily an equal footing that we were on as friends. And I do still look back with fondness on some of these friendships, even though I'm not friends with these people anymore, but I still feel some type of way about the dynamic that existed. But on the other side of things, there's also times in which there was friendship maintenance that I didn't do. Times in which I really could have done more for the people that were in my sort of circle. While also feeling that this notion of community that I really set out to achieve sometime in my 20s really just never materialized. It never manifested itself. I generally felt throughout my 20s that community was happening around me, but I wasn't really a part of it. And the most painful aspect of that has been feeling like I was aspiring to this community, but I wasn't really benefiting from it or receiving it in any way. The last aspect I want to touch on is financial. This is tied into the employment dissatisfaction, but it is its own topic that requires a little bit more introspection. In the scope of taking these rather dead-end jobs, I definitely have been under-earning throughout my adult life. That much is true. It's also been the case that it's been really hard to even think about holding on to money as I get older. It's something related to like a sense of foreshortened future, like not even thinking so much about what's going to happen 5 years or 10 years from now because I can't even picture myself being there. And so yes, I'm really pretty behind on things like saving for retirement or saving money in general. Which again is pretty peak millennial, but I still feel like there's an aspect of this whole life analysis that I'm doing here that has to touch on that financial piece in particular. I think there is a part of me that does sort of fear or avoid this notion of having wealth at some point, whether it's the amount of money itself or the responsibility and the status that the money confers. It's at this point that I have to ask myself a question. What would I do if I were not afraid? This is a particular question that comes from the Handbook of Peer Support Specialists. I actually formerly worked as a peer support specialist in an outpatient mental health program. My role in that program was partially to help them meet their treatment goals, but also to be there as a peer as they went through their diagnosis, treatment, and recovery. And in the scope of training for this peer support role, I encountered this question in my peer support training class of what would you do if you were not afraid? And when I say afraid, I don't necessarily mean fear as in a phobia, but fear being anything that can hold you back. It could be fear of failing. It could be fear of taking a risk. It could be fear of decompensating and going back to square one when it comes to your mental health journey. So when I come to this question of what would I do if I were not afraid, there's things that come to mind in terms of ambitions and aspirations, but the overarching answer for me is still, I don't know. I don't know if I would still want my dream job or this particular kind of relationship or this particular kind of creative accolade. It's incredibly difficult to envision myself succeeding sometimes. And this begets its own realization. Throughout this entire time of my early adulthood, I have not acted in my own self-interest, and that is the reason why I'm failing at life. And what do I mean when I say I have not acted in my own self-interest? It means that I follow some unspoken principles and values that keep me underemployed and underachieving. Principle number 1. I have to avoid displeasing people at all costs. Yes, I identify as a people pleaser or perhaps a people pleaser in recovery. That means that I generally do not like to upset people, ruffle feathers, and even express my own needs if it means that the other person is going to feel some type of way about it. This is a really reflexive avoidance that is so hard for me to shed. I mean, in one sense, it's avoiding conflict, sure. It also extends to not reacting to people when they're talking to me about certain things. It's about keeping that sort of poker face so that they don't see my reaction and my body language and react to that. It means that I don't articulate and express the needs that I have, or even just the minor sort of disagreements that I might have with a person or with a program or with something that's going on. It means that I avoid both giving and receiving feedback. This extends interpersonally and in relationships and in job situations as well. My general disposition in a work setting is to be a busy worker bee that doesn't make a fuss, which means that I often take on a lot of burdensome tasks and responsibilities without even really being asked to do so. This especially is going on in these sort of dead-end jobs where morale is pretty low. So even if I'm able to please my supervisors with this workflow, it typically ends in burnout for me. By this principle, I avoid a lot of difficult conversations or even just awkward conversations and conversations that have some sort of convoluted way of approaching them. It's not that I don't want to be bothered, it's that I'm really avoiding any sort of negative emotion that comes with that process. To an extent, staying in my comfort zone. Principle number 2. I must never unfairly benefit from any sort of privilege or upper hand. This is a loaded one, and it's one that I've only recently gained a sort of language to even talk about and analyze. What it means in a practical sense is that I'm hyper vigilant about the way that I walk through the world as a cisgender man, as a person that has this face and this complexion and this general disposition and appearance. My thought process is that I have to continuously leverage that continuum of privileges. In some ways, yes, by educating people and bringing them in, but also in a sense by keeping myself very small, very sort of humble and unarrogant, by being agreeable, by not making a fuss, by not coming off as entitled. I mean, all of these attributes that are actually kind of neutral, but I still assign a value to them. Now, my background is that I came of age in the 2010s when I was part of this nascent emerging social justice movement. This is a movement in which the paradigm of doing harm and harm reduction are kind of guiding principles to the work that one does. And I feel like I learned about this paradigm of doing harm to somebody, and I really internalized that in some negative ways. And this birthed my sort of commitment to never doing harm if I can help it, which is pretty lofty and maybe on its surface can come off as noble, but in other ways it does kind of ring a bell of a savior complex. And that's where it kind of collapses in on itself, because me keeping myself ontologically small is not actually going to really help anyone else in any material way, and it's certainly not going to help me. It's hard to untangle because it's not a shallow commitment to the social justice principles that I still live and abide by, but it is slightly divorced from the reality of we're all kind of in the mix of causing harm intentionally or unintentionally across each other. One cannot get hung up on being a morally pure entity. I consider myself partially retired from real actual organizing and activism, but this still is a barrier for me to get involved into anything else now. Principle number 3. I am not worthy of negotiation or forgiveness. This sounds really harsh, but essentially means that if I make a mistake, I have to really answer for that mistake, even in circumstances when the mistake I made was completely understandable. There's been times, especially in work settings, where I've made a mistake or perhaps not shown up when I needed to show up or not shown up to the extent that was necessary for me and required of me. And I just felt like, all right, now I just have to quit because I made this mistake and I disappointed people. I never felt like I could come at it from the perspective of, all right, this is actually a situation in which my needs and my accommodations are not being met, so I need to kind of negotiate what those are. Instead, I was just like, I effed up, I gotta go. In saying that, I recognize that it's a very immature place to arrive at with conflict. Ultimately though, I find it really hard to forgive people, so I just assume that no one else is gonna ever want to forgive me. It's almost like this ritual disposability, but of myself. Like, if I F up, then I have to ritualistically cast myself off the island and suffer for it. This is, of course, not realistic to how most human interactions proceed. When we look at all these principles in tandem, it's pretty easy to see how I don't act in my own self-interest. And the most immediate question is, why? What is it about my value system that dictates this outcome? More importantly, can I change it? Is this predestined or do I have a say in the matter? With that, I want to dive into a couple of potential explanations that I've come up with. And I want anyone watching this to actually weigh in on any potential explanation and see which one holds water more than any other. Perhaps it's a combination of things. Perhaps it's all of them. We shall see. Explanation number 1. Emotional neglect. I suppose this is a pretty jarring way to start out this list of explanations, but it does come back to a very visceral memory that I had from around when I was 24 years old. At that time, I read a book called Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents by Lindsay C. Gibson. This was not a book that I read trying to uncover any sort of truth about myself. I had just sort of seen the title floating around and I decided to check it out. When I tell you, I was gobsmacked. Reading the criteria in this book about how emotional neglect in childhood manifests in adulthood, I was looking at this paper and seeing my personality laid out in front of me. Like, I thought I was special. I thought that I was just inherently noble and altruistic and selfless, but in reality, these were actually some symptoms that happen when you as a young child have to parent your parents. This happens as a result of emotional validation and the sort of milestones of emotional development that are missing in childhood. Really, if you haven't already, go and check this book out because I think it does explain a lot, whether you're a person that was part of this experience or if you just know somebody that has this experience and that's kind of their thinking with their personality as well. So yes, I mean, this does apply to me in the sense that that's the case with my parents. And I do tend to think that this partially explains the setbacks that I've endured, if only because acting in my own self-interest was never instilled in me as a child. That said, I'm in my 30s now. Shouldn't I be able to shake it off? I would hope so, but there's times in conflict when I feel like I shrivel up and I'm all of a sudden now, again, that wounded 8-year-old or 13-year-old. So even if my value system was a little bit dictated by this experience, I don't necessarily think that it is fundamentally going to always be the case. It just is something that I can't really shake off. Explanation number 2. Say it with me, guys. So I've always had an inclination towards understanding myself as neurodivergent. I received an ADHD diagnosis when I was 4 years old. Now, I didn't really receive treatment for ADHD until I was an adult. My parents, my community, they did not believe in medication. I was never put on Ritalin or Adderall or anything like that for my ADHD as a child. And in retrospect, I think ADHD was a pretty accurate diagnosis, and I do think that it is something that I experience. And yet, there's more pieces to the puzzle. I never really thought of myself as being on the spectrum, and then all of a sudden I did. This coincided actually with me moving out of the Northeast and to the South. And yes, I did find the social expectations and customs of the Southern US to be pretty complex and confusing. And this was also a time when people said to my face, "Oh yeah, you're definitely autistic," or "You're definitely Asperger," or something of that nature. There's something going on with you. This was the first time I had ever floated this possibility, and that was in my late 20s. So yes, I think that there are some aspects of the neurodivergent mind and the autistic mind that could explain or kind of parlay some of the things that I experience and explain certainly things about my tendencies with friendships and unemployment. But I am not formally diagnosed. I have not been able to pursue or secure that particular diagnosis. Whether or not I'll be able to, or whether or not that's actually politically advantageous to have in this day and age, I don't know. That being said, I can look back on a lot of childhood experiences that I did have, and autism does kind of fit the bill for why those experiences happened and also why they're so hurtful even in the present day. And again, it does kind of come down to my community of origin being pretty undereducated about autism. For my parents and also my aunts and uncles and everyone around me, they saw that I got good grades and I mostly stayed out of trouble, and they just thought that everything was kind of hunky-dory. When I did express symptoms that were symptomatic, they pretty much told me, "There's nothing wrong with you. Get over it." Which, of course, I internalized as meaning that I had complete and total control over my life, and if I didn't meet my expectations, it was solely my fault. So that is to say, even if an autism diagnosis would explain part of things, it would also kind of fill in some of the gaps around other aspects of my experience. Potentially. Explanation number 3. Moral OCD. Obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, I've never really identified with the thought that I had OCD or any sort of flavor of that condition until recently. OCD is pretty complex, so I don't want to give a reductive explanation of what it is or how people experience it. It can be thought of in the framework of having an obsession about a particular topic and performing ritual compulsions in order to avoid or engage with that topic. The most stereotypical obsession that a person with OCD may have is about hygiene, therefore birthing the stereotype of the person with OCD washing their hands compulsively. In a framework of moral OCD, the obsession becomes whether or not a person is good or bad. And this could lead to some pretty intrusive compulsions for the person to either prove or disprove their obsessions. When I think back to my early adulthood, when I was first participating in social justice movements, there is an aspect to which I definitely wanted to demonstrate that I was good, and again, that I wasn't causing harm. So there's a light in which I can look at a lot of my actions that have held myself back and think about how it was an obsession, even if it was a sort of latently low-level obsession. In this framework, my obsession was sort of proving that I was good, and my compulsion was keeping myself small and unintrusive to prove that. I don't know if this fully tracks, and I hope that this isn't looked at as a sort of cheapening of the OCD experience. There's just been more and more signs to me recently that this is something that I should maybe lean into and check out, even if it does end up being disproved. And again, there is treatment for OCD, so I don't want this to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. Explanation number 4. This is something that I'm gonna call class anxiety, or perhaps alienation from one's raisings. By all accounts, I grew up relatively low income and working class. I never really made a fuss about this. It was only until I went to my elite university and saw how the rest of the world lived that I understood myself to be low income and working class. So I spent my early 20s comparing my trajectory to my classmates who were generally much more resourced than I was. At the same time, feeling a crisis of authenticity of, am I leaving behind my sort of origins if I do attain some sort of middle class and middle income lifestyle? And I do still feel today an obligation to never forget where I come from. So aside from any sort of framework of cognition or disability, there is also something there where I am a little bit afraid to elevate myself in life. As in, who would I be or who would I become if my life circumstances radically changed? Again, I haven't achieved that yet, but I do still kind of fear that to a certain extent. I fear being seen in the light of a middle class type of life when that's not exactly where I come from, and it's not second nature to me whatsoever. I do not consider myself to be a social climber by any means. That said, if I keep myself in a low income stratum for the rest of my life, it's not really going to bode well for me necessarily either. That is to say, no matter how you look at it, I'm kind of struggling to fit all the pieces together, which I think a lot of us are. I'm taking this more holistic approach just because I want to know what you all think. I want to know if I'm onto something, and I also want to know if I can somehow feel less alone by sharing this information. In essence, the beat goes on, and we should still introspect to the extent that it doesn't prevent us from moving forward. Alright guys, that's the video. Thanks again for making it this far. Let me know in the comments what you think about the subject matter of this video. I'm kind of doing a little bit more of a raw and confessional style in comparison to the videos that I've uploaded this far, so I want to know what you guys think about it. And also let me know if you identify with any of these experiences or if you've thought about them too in your healing journey. Also, please drop any links to resources that can help with any of these sort of conditions or anxieties in the comments below. This is Hassan with the Diaspora Gothic channel. Remember to stay connected, stay rooted, and stay dramatic. Bye.